Lightspeed in Naruto is a topic that is played not only in the Naruto community, but the community of various other anime, comic book, and even cartoons at some points as well, due to the people either not wanting Naruto to reach this tier of speed, so they constantly think of debunks to the arguments that get Naruto to this level, or the people on the side of Naruto who constantly think of ways to justify their position as to why Naruto should reach this tier of speed and how it's consistent. I will say before even starting to discuss this topic that I do not care whether Naruto is Lightspeed or not. I enjoy Naruto for what it is. I could care less who he loses to from another franchise or who he beats in the same franchise. I do however care about the arguments put forth for both the positions at hand, and I'll be going over both here, saying whether I think Naruto characters are Lightspeed or not, and if I do, which ones actually qualify for that tier of speed. So if you think Naruto characters are all multiverse busting massively faster than light chakra demons who can spank around the entirety of the Dragon Ball cast and bleed first at the same time, or you think Naruto is a moon level at best, barely above the speed of sound wimpy boy, I don't care too much. I'm just here to provide the information and tell you what the evidence actually supports. Now that I've made clear as to what my stance on the topic is, which is, just for the sake of simplicity, neutral, we can start talking about the first few statements of Lightspeed we get in Naruto and what they actually mean. I'd also like to say if there is ever any seemingly harsh language used or something along those lines, it's not indicative of me taking a side, it's just the word choice needed to convey the argument best, at least in my opinion. I'd also like to mention I am obviously not an omniscient being. I cannot say for sure that I have every statement and scan about Naruto characters being Lightspeed, but I can say I think I've gathered an extensive amount of scans, a few of which I think the majority have not seen. One last thing before we get into it, you'll notice a sort of common thing about the majority of these scans I'm going over, and that's that they're databook scans and not directly mentioned in the manga, with the exception of around 2 to 3 of them. If you dislike the databooks, which I don't think you should, just stay tuned for how I cover the actual mentions of Lightspeed in the manga. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe if you've been here before and leave a like on the video because it really helps me out a lot, but let's get into it. The first statement we get of a Naruto character having Lightspeed is, I kid you not, from the first arc of the show, and it's Haku. In Databook 1, during the description of Haku's ice mirrors, we get a statement for just how fast it's possible for Haku to move between each mirror. The databook states for Haku, it's possible to move between the mirrors at the speed of light. So I'm sure the same issue popped into your head when you first heard this, is that, well, Haku can't be Lightspeed because Kid Sasuke and Naruto were able to react to him, and you'd be right thinking this is definitely an issue. However, it's one that's easily resolved, and it's literally in the wording of the actual statement that you can use to sort of go against this claim. The databook only claims it's possible for Haku to move at this speed between his mirrors, not that he actually does it all the time. It never says what circumstances have to be met for Haku to reach this tier of speed, or if he can do it at will. If you're asking yourself what circumstances would allow Haku to get faster, Haku is actually the first one in the entire series to imply to us that shinobi can get stronger depending on their mental state, by saying to Naruto that when protecting someone, you can become as strong as you need to be. So if Haku is maybe protecting Zabuza or something like that, then maybe with a mental amp he can move through his mirrors at light speed, not necessarily that he's moving through them all the time at that speed. Another way around this statement is to say Haku is simply not trying on Naruto and Sasuke, meaning he wouldn't be using his full speed. If you want an example of Haku's actual full speed, or maybe while he's amped, you should look at him cutting in front of Kakashi after he amps himself up with the Raikiri before he kills Zabuza. Kakashi, who is obviously faster than both Naruto and Sasuke at this point, except for maybe the Naruto on the bridge with the 9 tails that amped him up to beat up Haku, but I'll leave that argument for another day as I don't think it's too relevant to the topic at hand. Really quickly before we move off this point, I'd also like to add in that the very next arc after this, both Naruto and Sasuke start getting beaten up by Rock Lee while weighted, who himself needed to open the first gate to beat up the Sound Ninja, who literally used sound as attacks and even gets hit a couple times. And if you want a comparison between the speed of light and the speed of sound is around 761 miles per hour, and the speed of light is around 670,616,629 miles per hour. If you don't know the exact difference between those two numbers, it's about 881,230 times. But yeah, moving on to the next part, I think we can conclude Haku can get to Lightspeed under certain circumstances, so this is a W for the people who think Naruto characters are Lightspeed. Moving on to our next example, we actually have a cluster of statements and they all surround the same person, probably one of the most controversial Naruto characters, that being Itachi Uchiha. I'm sure the majority of you are thinking, there's no way Itachi can be Lightspeed, he almost got hit by Kirin. which is a lightning speed jutsu. Well, while I'm going over this section, please just take into account that Itachi was heavily weakened during his encounter with Kirin, not only having near blindness in both eyes, but low stamina after his prolonged fight with Sasuke, and the worsening effects of his deadly sickness that resembles some form of tuberculosis. Now that that's out of the way, the first statement is actually nowhere near the fight with Sasuke. It's 3 years before that encounter ever even happens. It's during his fight with Kakashi in part 1 where he uses the Water Fang bullet jutsu. From the water, bullets had the speed of light coming from a blind spot to bore into the enemy. The issue I see most people have with this scan is that while it was blocked by Kakashi, and people find it somewhat absurd that Kakashi in part 1 is Lightspeed, and I somewhat agree with this, but there are a few things to note. Kakashi is extremely fast. He's much faster than Lightning even as a kid, as we know by guys saying Kakashi had chopped Lightning in half when he was much younger. That's how Chidori became the Raikiri. Now this jutsu is blocked by Kakashi, but the context behind the blocking of this sort of doesn't allow it to be an anti-feat for the jutsu. Kakashi reacts to the fact that Itachi tried to distract him with his right hand while weaving signs with his left hand that were so fast Kakashi couldn't follow them at all. Kakashi then backs up before the jutsu is even launched, and his water wall blocks it. So something we can say is maybe the jutsu moves at light speed, but the startup time is so slow you don't have to scale to the jutsu in speed in order to block it. We also know Itachi was holding back on Kakashi at this time, so maybe the jutsu isn't moving at full speed. You can also say there are certain conditions needed to be met for Itachi to use this jutsu, like being on top of a body of water, but that's nigh irrelevant since all we're trying to do is come to a conclusion on if these people can actually use attacks this fast. The next Itachi Lightspeed statement is for another one of his abilities, the most famous genjutsu in the Naruto franchise, at least as far as I can tell, and that's Tsukuyomi. In the data book for Tsukuyomi, it's stated that even a body as fast as the speed of light and made out of iron can't escape this jutsu, which should obviously imply that Itachi can hit someone that can move at the speed of light with this jutsu. This one is fairly blatant, and we have a statement about Itachi's jutsu beforehand, just a basic water jutsu, being light speed as well, to say maybe this sort of thing is consistent for Itachi to have light speed attacks. So that's another 2 W's for the people who think Naruto characters are light speed. Now, to follow up on this directly by addressing the Kirin situation, there's actually a translation from the data book that claims the jutsu is light speed. Now, in the official translation from Viz, it stated this jutsu eliminates enemies in a flash, so maybe it's not directly light speed, just that it's claiming it's extremely fast. But I don't speak Japanese, and I don't think anyone would disagree that Itachi is extremely weakened during that scene due to the things I laid out earlier. So we can move on to some of the other examples of light speed, with Kirin being a maybe W for the Naruto characters being light speed, and the 2 examples of Itachi's jutsu being W's in favor of the position. Getting into the shinobi from the Cloud Village, one that essentially prides itself on speed, or at least that's the feeling I get from the head of the village, the 3rd and 4th Raikage, due to their lightning cloaks and run-ins with KCM Naruto. We actually have 2 statements from the Cloud Village ninja that bring up light or light speed, and we'll start off with Darui. Darui's Storm Release Laser Circus is stated in Databook 4 to be a leading movement technique that freely controls multiple light rays emitted from joined hands. I don't really have an argument against this one, although I will say if you abide by VSBW standards, this jutsu does not have the properties of light, and thus they don't count it as such. But other than that, I guess the statement is fine to say Darui has a light speed attack. The Raikage and B have the next statement coming from the page with the lariat, where it stated the Raikage and B load chakra into their arm while rushing at almost the speed of light. This is another almost blatant one. It's literally just saying that the Raikage and B are almost hitting the speed of light when they do their lariat, although no forms are ever specified for this. Rather, it's V1 Raikage and V1 B. However, all over the page it shows the forms I just mentioned, so you can maybe argue that after B and Raikage go into V2, they can actually achieve the speed of light or higher, depending on how big you think the amps are to their respective forms, which I won't get into here since it's not all too relevant to the topic. These next 2 are probably the simplest ones among the group I've mentioned, or at least they're some of the easiest. They come from Fu the Jinchuriki of the Seven Tails and Mifune the leader of the samurai. You know, the guy who's being controlled by Danzo at the summit, used Kodo Matsukami, fought Hanzo in the past and lost, blah blah blah. Just a brief recalling of his character since he's fairly forgettable due to his lack of appearances in the manga and fairly boring character in my opinion, which seems to be a shared opinion amongst most people. But the thing about Mifune being light speed, actually comes from the War Arc, where he uses an attack on the Jubi that is literally called Beam of Light. I know a lot of edgelords out there may be saying like, oh, 6, that's a naming fallacy. Just because it's called light doesn't mean it actually is light. Not only is that sort of absurd in the case of Naruto, where most of the time techniques are named after what they literally do, like Raikiri or Lightning Blade because Kakashi used it to cut lightning, or Rasengan, which literally translates to spiraling chakra fear, which it literally is. So Beam of Light should be fine for a light speed attack, and even if you wouldn't like to take it as that and bring up some outlier names of jutsu that don't correlate with the argument, what the data book 4 tells us is that this jutsu does indeed move at light speed. Although I will mention that when Mifune does use it, he is amped up by Naruto's chakra, so take that into account how you would want to. The next statement, as I mentioned in the former half of this section, has to do with the Seven-Tails Jinchuriki Fu. She's the little blue-haired girl from Takegakure, or the village hidden in the waterfall, that fights alongside other 6 Jinchuriki against B and Naruto. In this, she uses a jutsu against B and Naruto, which is stated to use light particle. You can actually see these in the manga, and I'll have my editor highlight them on screen so they're visible to everyone, but obviously light particles should move at the speed of light, and if you take all other examples as a way to build consistency at this point, light speed attacks are nothing foreign to the Naruto series, so this one shouldn't be anything crazy at all. Before I start going over the scan I'm sure everyone had in mind before clicking on this video, there is 2 more that I'd like to mention that may actually be surprising for most, and it comes from Sage Kabuto. When Kabuto first enters Sage mode, he launches a jutsu after claiming he's a dragon that surpassed the snake, called Sage Art White Rage Technique, or White Extreme Attack in the official translations. Databook 4 says it changes the natural energy gathered inside the body into a dragon of light and releases it from the mouth. I'm sure you can tell where I'm going with this. If the dragon is made out of light, naturally it should move at light speed, and if you want to use earlier statements as consistency, as I mentioned in the last example, Itachi already has jutsu that should be as fast as this one when he's much weaker due to his sickness nerf. And if you take the Kirin light speed statement into example where Itachi can react to light speed jutsu at this speed while he's, severely weakened, this jutsu being that fast isn't even completely out of this world, considering both Itachi and EMS Sasuke react to it, who are both high tier characters in the verse, excluding the 6-pass God of Shinobi level opponents like Edo Madara, Hashirama, and arguably KCM 2 Sage Naruto and KCM Minato. Going back to part 1 for this next statement, since I forgot to mention earlier, it stated that the Anbu Black Ops have movement as fast as light. Their deadly techniques easily break through enemy defenses. Now this is another example where the fan translations deviate from the original translation. The original translation for this jutsu says, like a flash of light, their deadly techniques instantly break through enemy defenses. This official translation makes it sound more like a simile than an actual light speed attack, and I will say it would be a bit weird if random Anbu members, who should all be weaker than Kakashi, had attacks that could scale to Itachi's level, which we know Kakashi is not via their fight, and it being confirmed by a few databook statements. I will say if you take the fan translation into account though, this should get you a large upscaling, because it would mean that anyone faster than Kakashi in part 1 is light speed, and you can scale a lot of characters as that fast, like Kakashi in part 2, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, Itachi, Minato, Kakuzu, any form of Naruto past Sage mode, Sasuke and Hebi and above. But yeah, that wraps it up for the part 1 statements. Now for the one everyone's been waiting for, Madara's Light Fang. This is the one attack that the majority of people I see accept the statement of it being light speed, despite it coming from the data book, which tons of people reject and say are invalid. I think it's due in part to Madara's nature and how powerful he's presented as. It's a lot easier for people to accept someone like Ten Tails Madara being light speed than Haku in part 1. A lot of people like to try and downplay this feat of Naruto dodging this light speed attack, claiming that it's only a relativistic plus feat at best, but I think it's more reasonable to say someone like 6-pass Naruto has surpassed the likes of people like Itachi and any amount of strength Haku could have mustered up from a mental amp. To say that this feat of Naruto dodging isn't exactly a light speed feat, but he should be more than fast enough to perform light speed feats outside of this. I will also mention the databooks never say Madara's technique caps at light speed, So if you do take the earlier statements as valid, which you should, then Naruto barely dodging the light thing should just mean it's faster than light by some unquantifiable margin, which doesn't really matter since it's all the same in the end. This would be another W for the position of Naruto characters being Lightspeed. Moving into Boruto territory, there are only a few examples of Lightspeed movement here, so I'll make this section as brief as possible so as to not take up too much of your time if you made it this far into the video. In the Naruto Retsuden novels, we're told Naruto is sick with a chakra illness that prevents him from using his chakra in combat, so as to not worsen the illness. In a brief scuffle with someone named Fury, Naruto manages to react to a photon gun being shot at him without any chakra. Obviously, chakra amping your stats massively with Naruto's 6-pass Sage mode and Kurama being upwards of maybe a 10,000 times amp, scaling out the Shinobi Alliance and other amps in the series like the Curse Mark. This would easily propel Naruto into the massively faster than light tier of speed, but that's all if you accept the novels as a canon part of the franchise. If not, I guess you could say only Retsuden Naruto is that fast and move on with your day. I don't feel the need to provide an argument for the canonicity of these novels, as it gets a bit convoluted and would detour greatly from the topic at hand, so I'll leave it up to you to decide. The next part of Boruto that has Lightspeed movement, or whatever you want to call it, is in Naruto's fight against Delta when he dodges her destructive beams. The definition of beam being shaft or ray of light, to say Naruto is actually dodging these Lightspeed attacks from Delta. This argument is a bit shaky to me though, and this video is already entirely too long, so I won't get too much into it, but yeah, that's my take on Naruto Lightspeed. As I said, my position on this going into it is neutral. I do not care whether Naruto characters are Lightspeed or not. I just go along with whatever the evidence is telling me, and it seems to be pointing in the direction of them being that fast at the very least. As always, if you like the video, leave a like on it and subscribe. This is the kind of content I do a lot, so you may enjoy some future videos as well, as a few I've already done, so check those out. But other than that, have a nice day.